Are you looking for a budget-friendly alternative to the Fujifilm 23mm 1.4? Well, in this video, I'm going to do an in-depth photo and video comparison of the new Viltrox 23mm 1.4 versus the Fujinon 23mm 1.4. Alright, let's get to it. What's up everyone, Reggie B Photo here and welcome back to the channel. So for those of you who are new, my name is Reggie Ballesteros and I'm a wedding photographer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. So for me, the 23mm focal length is a must-have for wedding photography, as well as storytelling work, documentary work, and environmental portraiture, which is why the Fujinon 23mm 1.4 is my main workhorse lens for wedding photography. And you can check out my previous review on it up above or down in the description below to learn more about what I feel about that lens. And while I personally love and use exclusively first-party Fujifilm prime lenses for my Fujifilm wedding photography kit, I definitely think there needs to be third-party options for those who are looking for a more budget-friendly 1.4 glass. And for the longest time, the only third-party Fujifilm lenses that had autofocus were a select few Zeiss lenses. And then all of a sudden, Viltrox came to the scene first with the 85mm 1.8. But in the recent months, Viltrox released the brand new 23mm 1.4 lens with autofocus. And that's what I'm talking to you all about today. Upon hearing about this lens, I reached out to EM Great and they were kind enough to send me a copy of the 23mm 1.4 Viltrox for this review. And to clarify, they didn't pay me to say anything specific. This is purely going to be a fairly scientific comparison of the optics, image quality, and performance, as well as my honest conclusion about what I recommend to you all and how you should buy accordingly. And yes, I know, I typically don't do boring scientific tests on images and lenses for this channel. Never before have I done a sharpness test or a brick wall shot or a zoomed in bokeh comparison, but I feel for this particular video, these tests are absolutely necessary to help you all determine whether or not the Fujinon 23mm 1.4 is worth paying the higher premium, or if the Viltrox 23mm 1.4 will be fine for your needs. So without further ado, let's get into the comparison. Right now we're inside Lightroom and I have pretty much pulled up all unedited JPEGs straight out of the camera. These are high resolution JPEGs taken with both the Fujifilm 23mm 1.4, which is marked in yellow, and then the Viltrox 23mm 1.4, which is marked in red. So first things first, let's compare the center sharpness. And I did want to say that the first image, the 1.4, I do feel like the Viltrox actually got a little bit sharper. I don't know if it was because of the autofocus errors on my part, but the 1.4 wide open sharpness in the center for both these lenses, it does feel like the Viltrox came out a hair sharper. And then now we jump to f2. It does still seem like, again, the center sharpness of the Viltrox is still just a little bit sharper. It's kind of interesting to see that. Okay, now that we're at 2.8, it does look like that the Fuji is sharper than the Viltrox at this point. And it was very interesting to see that the 23mm 1.4 for the Viltrox did come out with better center sharpness in the wide open images. Now that we're at 4.0, it's very clear that the Fuji is sharper in the center. And as we keep progressing on to 5.6 and f8, the Fuji is definitely sharper in the center. Now let's move on to the corner sharpness and go back to wide open. And we're going to check out the corners over here. And just from first glance at 1.4, it definitely looks like the Fuji is sharper in the corners. And then checking this out a little bit more on f2, Fuji still definitely is clearer on the corners. And now it looks like at 2.8, the Viltrox is kind of catching up a little bit, but still very clear that the Fuji is significantly sharper, especially at the extreme corners. Okay, now at f4.0, it does look like things are evening up a little bit. Definitely sharp overall on the corners for the Viltrox, but the Fuji is a hair more detail and micro contrast. And at 5.6, it looks like everything's pretty much evened up. So that's pretty much the threshold for the corner sharpness, is you have to stop down to 5.6 for the Viltrox to catch up to the Fuji. So now we're going to compare the minimum focus distance of both lenses. So these two images were taken at the Viltrox's minimum focus distance. The left one is the Fuji and the right one is the Viltrox. So let's check this out a little bit here. And then we can do a little bit of bokeh comparison. It looks pretty even here at the equivalent minimum focus distance of the Viltrox, but the only caveat is that the Fuji does have the ability to get even closer. So if you want to do a bokeh comparison at the same distance, they're fairly similar, but if you want to compare which lens can get better bokeh, like the ultimate amount of bokeh, the Fuji 23mm 1.4 can get it because it can focus closer than the Viltrox can. And here you can see these two lights right here. You can see it's significantly larger bokeh and it's softer. Okay, so now on to kind of like an overall vignetting test. It's pretty obvious right here. You can see that the Viltrox suffers from vignetting right here wide open. And then if we're moving on through the images at f2, it's still present. And then here at f2.8, it's kind of even on both cameras. So you do have to kind of you do have to stop down to f4 for the vignetting to pretty much 100% go away on the Viltrox. But at that point at f4, it starts tightening up the vignetting on the Fuji to pretty much even across the entire frame. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the bokeh comparison over here, and we're just going to look around at wide open. The Viltrox is on the left and the Fujifilm is on the right. So we're going to look around different parts of the image to see if we can identify if the bokeh is different. And right off the bat, I do see that the Viltrox does have somewhat more rounded circular bokeh, where the Fujifilm has this kind of like oniony shape, or kind of like a lemon shape. But we do see that the Viltrox has a little bit of more contrasty or pronounced edges, where the Fuji has more softer edges. And let's look around a little bit here. See some chromatic aberration in the bokeh for the Viltrox. I do have like a slight better blend of the highlight bokeh on the Fuji versus the Viltrox. It really just depends on the part of the area of the frame, but let's see. So this is a very busy area, and it does seem that at this corner part, the bokeh of the Fuji is larger. It's blending in slightly better, but it is a busy area overall, and I don't think one is obviously better than the other. You have to zoom in really close to kind of find those differences. So I think as far as bokeh goes, I'd give a hair to the Fujifilm, but it's not significant. And then here we're just going to progress and see how the bokeh develops over the different frames. I'm suspecting it's going to be fairly similar across the board. It does seem that the Viltrox is already forming these kind of edge shapes already, whereas at 2.8 the Fujifilm is still a little bit more rounder than the Viltrox. And here we start seeing at f4, they're both taking on these kind of hexagonal or octagonal, I'm not sure which one, shapes. And again, I just have to compare that at wide open. This is wide open, but at the closest, like best bokeh that both lenses can do, the Fuji is always going to get closer and have able to be smoother and larger bokeh that it can achieve just because of that closest minimum focus distance. Okay, now for the final test, we're going to check out some chromatic aberration. It's looking like the Fuji is doing significantly better in this regard, because there's a very clear stripe of that green chromatic aberration, where on the Fuji it's not really there. And as far as the red chromatic aberration right here, it looks pretty equal in both. But yeah, here you can see that there's a nice stripe right there on the Viltrox, and then the Fuji doesn't really even have it at all. Again, they're all minor things, and you can only really see them when you zoom all the way in, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. So I do want to note that I was not able to do an in-depth test on the still photography autofocus speed or consistency, as the COVID-19 pandemic had prevented me from going out and testing the Viltrox autofocus in any type of real-world situation. I did, however, photograph my kids around the house with the lens, and I didn't really feel like the Viltrox did significantly worse or better than the Fuji 23mm 1.4. But I'll leave it at that, and until I can actually do some formal autofocus tests out in the real world, I can't really make any conclusions. But as far as the video autofocus goes, the Viltrox significantly has less autofocus noise than the Fuji 23mm 1.4. I'm not going to say that the Viltrox has no noise whatsoever, but especially for talking head or video like vlogs and stuff like that, I do think the Viltrox is going to be a better performer in the autofocus noise department. So basically, I can summarize my observations and recommendations down to really a few key points. First, if a close minimum focus distance is important to you, the Fuji 23mm 1.4 is the absolute clear winner. And if you really care about any type of vignetting, especially wide open, then again, the 23mm 1.4 on Fujifilm is going to be the winner. But when it comes down to overall sharpness, corner sharpness, chromatic aberration, and even bokeh, I think the differences between the two lenses aren't really that significant. I mean, sure, the Fujifilm 23mm 1.4 does slightly pull ahead in a lot of these marks, but does it warrant more than double the cost? For many photographers, I don't really think so. And also, if you're in the videography department and you're doing a lot of run and gun that doesn't have manual focus and requires autofocus as well as audio while autofocusing, I think the Viltrox is really going to be a strong consideration for you. And of course, you know, with the budget in mind, I think it's going to be kind of a slam dunk for those that are doing both hybrid photo and video. But for me personally, I will be sticking to the Fujinon 23mm 1.4 for both my personal work and my professional wedding work. It just really hasn't failed me in the autofocus department and as far as the image quality goes. And for my personal shooting style, I heavily rely on the flexibility to be able to focus very close up. So that metric about the lens is really important to me. But again, if you're on a budget and you really don't care about having like that 99% of the image quality and capabilities, if 90% is really good enough for you, the Viltrox is a hell of a deal and you should be more than fine for most photographers out there. Again, if you can't justify the price point of the Fuji version. So I'm hoping that this comparison along with my personal insights of these two lenses will help you in your search for that perfect 23mm 1.4 prime for your photography style as well as your budget. If you do want to see the unedited high-resolution JPEG straight from the camera of all the images and the test results that I showed today, I do have a link down in the description to download them. Basically, all you have to do is click the link, provide your name and your email address, and then from there I can send you a link to download that full folder of the high-resolution JPEG images. That way you can review them, zoom into them to your heart's desire, and you can see them on a big monitor because YouTube video quality just isn't always the best when it comes to judging images for sharpness. And I do think that being able to see the sharpness and image quality differences very up close is going to be important for you all when determining if you're going to buy either the Fujifilm lens or the Viltrox lens. And if you're ready to pull the trigger on one of these lenses, I've got affiliate links in the description down below if you want to support the channel at no additional cost to you. And if you are leaning towards the Viltrox, I do have a discount code for you using the discount code of 0523MF14 for 5% off of the Viltrox lens up until July 11th, 2020. So be sure to take advantage of that discount if that's the lens that you want to go with. With all that said, if this video helped you out, please give it a like, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. As always, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as I post a new Fujifilm or photography video every week. But if that's too long for you, I am posting new posts on Instagram, photography tips, tricks, and tutorials throughout the week. Alright, that's it for me. Remember to get out, go shoot, and I'll catch you all in the next video.